I'm not a big fan of the phrase coming of age story. It's a type of story, apparently. I'm not a fan of it because it is not large enough to include what it really is about. When we call something a coming of age story, we are usually referring to a kind of story that happens to characters who are in their late teens or early 20s, and they are going through some confusion, struggling against opposition from outside, maybe their parents, maybe their peers, maybe they're struggling to find their identities, and after some struggle, after some trials and errors, after some temptations towards different kinds of lives, different forms of lives, they settle into an identity, they settle into something, they settle into a form of life, and then they become an adult. That's at least part of the process of adulthood for them. So they come of age, they become mature. Now, the reason why I don't like it is because it is, pardon my language, I think it is too much of a normie concept. It doesn't really regard people who have identities or forms of lives that clash with the dominant cultural narratives. So coming of age means, okay, there are certain things that you have to struggle with at that age in your life. You have to maybe think about philosophical, existential questions. Maybe you struggle a little bit with nihilism or a very tame form of nihilism. And maybe you experiment with some hedonistic forms of living, and then you get over it. And then you stop thinking about fundamental questions of life. You stop reading Camus and Sartre. It's very youthful, that stuff. It's a youthful literature. You get over it. Catcher in the Rye, of course. You stop that, and then you start working in an office, or you start your university program in business administration or marketing. You join the world. You join the real world. And I think that coming of age story is a way of branding a kind of story to make it tame and harmless. The general category that I would be more comfortable with, general label, and I think we should think about coming of age story as a subtype of that general category, broader category, more inclusive, would be finding form, a finding form type of story, a story where the protagonists are struggling to find the form of life. They're struggling against, external and internal conflict, forces that create confusion for them, or oppression for them, or repression. And they're kind of moving against that, trying to move against that and find who they are, find what their life is about, what life is about for them, and in general, what life can be about, different possibilities in life. So that finding form, finding what your style is a response to a question that can happen at any age. At any age, you don't have to be in your late teens and early 20s to struggle with that. You can have a crisis at any point in your life. Again, another way of taming that is to call something a midlife crisis. Because it is something that happens, it's very brief, you get over it after a while. Maybe you drink a little bit, you go through a divorce, you get over it, and you join society once again as a productive member in high standing, good standing, high esteem and good standing. Crisis can happen at any age, and that attempt to find form can happen at any age, especially to people who have identities, narratives that don't already exist in society. People who cannot fit nicely into existing categories. Like, I'm this type of person. Okay, so I am talking about a book indirectly, and the book I'm talking about is called The Beautiful Room is Empty, written by Edmund White. This is part of a trilogy of 3 novels. I have not read the other 2. This is the first one that I'm reading, first work of fiction by Edmund White that I'm reading. I am very thankful to John David because he was the person who first brought this book to my attention. He has, I think, a couple of books on his YouTube channel, a couple of videos on his YouTube channel where he talks about this book. And I remember him describing The Beautiful Room is Empty as a stunningly beautiful book. And I agree with that. It is stunningly beautiful. It is very beautiful. And I to me, this book is extremely important because it embodies that finding form type of story. The book was published in 1988. I think it is at least semi-autobiographical. It covers events that supposed to have happened in 1950s to our central character, the main protagonist, who we are reading about through his first-person perspective. So he is a young man in his, I think, late teens, yes. And he's coming into the world from a family that initially we don't read much about. I mean, here we don't read much about his family, but I imagine, when you read the book and how it begins, you imagine him coming from a not very loving place, not a place that recognizes him very much. We do read about that, actually, the lack of recognition, the lack of support. So he's coming into this world, a world of his peers, university life, college life, and he is intensely struggling to find himself, find his place. He's coming into the world of art and coming to find his identity in that world in dialogue with art, works of art, and artists. He's super sensitive about how other people react, how other people express themselves, and how other people respond to him especially. And he's a people pleaser. At least initially, he's a hyper people pleaser. He wants to be in harmony, be in harmony with other people, other characters, in order to maintain that dialogue, in order to continue to receive feedback from them. So again, that is worth repeating, that he is finding his identity, finding his form of life with the help of others. And that highlights the fact that there are always cultural and social infrastructures that support our identities and our sense of self. Our sense of self is always supported. If you are a shy person, there was a cultural and social infrastructure that supported that shy way of comporting yourself, behaving. If you are a very confident person, if you're a thoughtful person, if you're a person who is interested in intellectual things, there were at some point at least, or maybe still ongoing, support, cultural infrastructure, social infrastructure. Other people who support or at least supported that identity, that way of being. So we read about those characters here. The first two chapters are really great. Oh my God. The first two chapters. The first one is just quickly we jump into introducing one of the major other characters, Maria, and her supportive role in our central character's life. Similarly, we read about Tex, Lou, and we read in later chapters around 3, 4, 5, we read about the story of discovering the secret society of gay men that help the central character structure and channel his desire. Because he has to go from his desires, his sexuality being total darkness, total taboo, total unknown, total, oh my God, I don't know what to do with this, to, okay, now I have some things to do. Now I have certain structures, again, cultural structures, cultural rituals that allow him to channel his energy, channel his desire. And it's a way of not just channeling, but examining, also inspecting. It's a way, they give him a way of those structures, even though they're secret side of the community and society. They are visible enough to him, they become visible enough to him to give him space for self-discovery. There are so many great observations in the book, and one of them was about not being on the same page with the people who are closest to you. You think that you have such great sympathy with someone or with some people, and when you check your mutual understanding with them, you realize that, oh my God, we are on different pages. We don't have a shared understanding on this issue or that issue. And it can be funny. It can be a little bit sad or alienating. At some point, he reveals the fact that he's gay to Maria, his, I think, closest friend. And Maria says in response, so I think he expects Maria to say, oh, wow, okay, I didn't know that, or being supportive to him. But Maria says, of course, that's what this friendship has always been about. We are both gay. That's what it's about. That's what it has always been about. Our sentiments and our sympathies, our shared little secret that has always been unspoken. So that's funny because for her, from her perspective, it has always been the unspoken element of their friendship. For him, it was different. Okay, a couple of other passages that I want to read to give you a sense of what this book is like. Okay, we read, quote, I'd come to see every aspect of my being as vague and shifting, and in that very cloudiness had lain my definition. I was the boy who hadn't started living yet. And we read that on page 82. Going back, page 77 and 78. I'm going to read a couple of passages, jumping a little bit, not covering everything literally. This one is about struggling together with a close friend to find your identities, working together to make sense of who you are, to make sense of who the friend is, and what the world that you're living in is. Okay, so we read, quote, she and I ascribed the most appalling motives to each other out of some seemingly scientific zeal. But unlike a real scientific proposition, which can be verified or at least negated, ours submitted to no proof, since the very things being discussed were unconscious, hence unknowable. I say things because I hesitate to speak of them as feelings. An unconscious feeling strikes me as an impossibility. The one thing we know for sure is what we are feeling. What we are feeling. At least now, I believe that no one else can correct our feelings. They are pure, incorrigible. We were scaring each other, but the mutual attention was flattering, as when a lovely palm reader holds your hand, looks into your eyes, and predicts tragic eventualities. It was easier for us to accept that we were sick than to acknowledge that we were powerless and life vapid. Okay, now there's another kind of observation that also really shook me when I read it. Shook me with its truth and also its hiddenness. This is from page 126 of the edition that I have here. He's talking about his sexual experience with another character named Lou and the pleasure that he finds in that. And then his response to that pleasure. We read, quote, it didn't occur to me that this shockingly intense pleasure could be sought after. If you're someone mainly eager to please others, you don't think much about your own pleasure. Taking pleasure is not a survival skill, while giving it most certainly is. Something that he's observing in someone else, something that he's observing in their relationship, and the contrast, what is absent in the other person is intensely present in him. He is charged with this desire to please, and the other person is not that concerned with pleasing the other. And he realizes that it has something to do with survival, learning to survive, learning to please someone associated with survival. All right, one last quick thing to read, page 109. What this work is about, what any work of art is ultimately about. The most important thing about my work is that I had lived through something, as though I had saved a child from drowning. So simple, and yet so profound. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. Please check out my Patreon page, my reading group, if you're interested in joining a community, a little community of people working together, reading together, and discussing together with very little pressure. And otherwise, looking forward to speaking with you soon. Bye for now.